Good morning. We're going to begin with our scripture passage for today, which is Exodus chapter 33, verses 12 through 23. Moses said to the Lord, "You have been telling me, lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your ways, so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people." The Lord replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Then Moses said to him, "If your presence does not go with us, do not send us up from here. How will anyone know that you are pleased with me and with your people unless you go with us? What else will distinguish me and your people from all the other people on the face of the earth?" And the Lord said to Moses, "I will do the very thing you have asked, because I am pleased with you and I know you by name." Then Moses said, "Now show me your glory." And the Lord said, "I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I will have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I will have compassion. But," he said, "you cannot see my face, for no one may see me and live." Then the Lord said, "There's a place near me where you may stand on a rock. When my glory passes by, I will put you in a cleft of the rock and cover you with my hand until I have passed by. Then I will remove my hand and you will see my back, but my face must not be seen." May God add his blessing to the reading and hearing of these words. So in Exodus 33, the people of Israel are faced with a very interesting situation. In order to understand it, we need to look at some history in the previous chapter. In Exodus 32, we find Moses up on the mountain with God, where he's receiving the Ten Commandments. Now, Moses was gone a long time, and the people of Israel got restless. When they did, they convinced Aaron, Moses' brother, to make them an idol to worship. So Aaron gathered all the gold from the people, and he made them a golden calf. When Moses came down off the mountain and saw this, he was furious. Imagine, while he was on the mountain with God, the people were already breaking the first two commandments that God was giving him. Moses was so angry that he threw down the tablets that contained the Ten Commandments and he broke them to pieces. Well, if Moses was that mad, imagine how God felt. He was also furious with the people. He told Moses that he would blot out from his book the names of those who had sinned against him, and he struck them with the plague. Then he told Moses to go and lead the people to the promised land. God had promised this land to the people, and he would deliver this promise, sending an angel before them to drive out the people living in the land. The Israelites would be blessed with a land flowing with milk and honey. However, although God would provide his blessings for his people, he said that he would not go with them. He told Moses that he simply could not be with these people, whom he called a stiff-necked people. He saw that they were stubborn and they did not listen or obey, and he just decided to remove his presence from them. The prospect of God not being with them upset the people, but it upset Moses even more. This is where our text picks up for today. How does Moses react to the prospect of leading the people without God's presence? Remember, God has still promised his blessings on the people. Could that be enough? Maybe the people should just accept the blessings, be thankful, and move on. Maybe Moses should accept that also. But did he? No. Moses proves in the passage that we just read that he is desperate for God's presence. Think about how that relates to us today. When we're faced with the prospect of God removing himself from our presence, how would we react? If we knew that God would still give us his blessings, but God himself would not be with us, would that be enough? Or would we be desperate for God? Was there ever a time in your life when you wanted something really big from someone? Maybe as a child you wanted your parents to let you do something, or as an adult you wanted a raise, something big. How would you approach that person that you wanted this favor from? Well, one way of doing that is to start small and work up to the big thing that you want. Let's look at an example. If little Sarah wants Marcy to spend the night with her, but she doesn't know if her parents will agree, she might handle it like this. First, she might go to her mom and say, "Mom, can I rent a movie to watch tonight?" Well, it's not a very big request, so likely Mom will say yes. After Mom says yes to that, Sarah might feel a little bit braver, and next she might say, "Well, Mom, Marcy really loves movies, and it would be so much fun to have someone here to watch it with. So can Marcy come over and watch the movie?" If Mom agrees to that, then Sarah will finally get to the big question. "Well, Mom, since Marcy will already be here, and the movie won't get over until late, why let Marcy just spend the night with me?" See how Sarah led up to what she wanted by starting with something small, and with each yes from Mom, she got braver and asked for more. Well, this is kind of how Moses approached God. First, Moses approached God with his first request in verses 12 and 13. Moses says to God, basically, "You've been telling me to lead these people, and you said you're pleased with me, so teach me your ways so that I can continue to please you." This is Moses' first request. He needs to know what to do and how to do it. So he asked God to teach him. By asking this, he was also letting God know that he was worried about leaving the people without God's presence. But wait a minute. Before we even look at what God replies, let's ask ourselves, what right does Moses have to ask God for anything? What makes him feel like he is worthy of asking God for a favor? There's one answer to that question, and the answer is Moses and God have a relationship. Moses knows God. As far back as the burning bush experience, Moses demonstrated that he knows God. In Exodus 3:6, God introduced himself to Moses as the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And as soon as God said this, Moses hid his face because he knew who God was and how holy he was. And over the years, Moses grew closer and closer to God. Let's read the verses that came right before our key passage today. Exodus 33, verses 7 through 11. Now Moses used to take a tent and pitch it outside the camp, some distance away, calling it the tent of meeting. Anyone inquiring of the Lord would go to the tent of meeting outside the camp. And whenever Moses went out to the tent, all the people rose and stood at the entrances to their tents, watching Moses until he entered the tent. As Moses went into the tent, the pillar of cloud would come down and stay at the entrance while the Lord spoke with Moses. Whenever the people saw the pillar of cloud standing at the entrance to the tent, they all stood and worshiped, each at the entrance to their tent. The Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. Then Moses would return to the camp, but his young aide, Joshua son of Nun, did not leave the tent. So here we learn that Moses regularly went into the tent of meeting with God. And when he did, the pillar of cloud would come down, and it says that God would speak to Moses as one speaks with a friend. Can you imagine that? God speaking directly to you as one person speaks to a friend? Moses couldn't get much closer to God than that. Even the Israelite people recognized that something special was going on and was happening when Moses entered that tent. The Bible says that when Moses went into the tent and the pillar of cloud came down, the people stood and worshiped. Moses was the only person who went into the tent and talked to God face to face. But the other people recognized the importance of that. So Moses knew God. He was close to God. But more importantly, God also knew Moses. Twice in chapter 33, God says to Moses that he knows him by name. In verse 12, Moses quoted God as saying, "I know you by name, and you have found favor with me." Again, in verse 17, God says, "I am pleased with you, and I know you by name." So what's the big deal? Why does God keep saying that he knows Moses by name? To us, to say that we know someone's name might even mean that we don't know them very well. If someone asks you if you know so-and-so, you might say, "I know the name, but I just can't quite place them." But in the ancient Hebrew world, to know someone's name was another way of saying that you know the person. To them, a name was not just a label or a way of identifying a person. The name was actually equivalent to the person. The name was considered to contain the very essence of who you were. Now today, some people do think about the meaning of their names. You can look up the meaning in a book or on the internet, and you can find out that somebody's name means pure or rich or broad meadow. But some people take naming their children a bit further than that. At the end of the 1960s, a lot of people who had lived as hippies in communes and so forth began to get married and have children. And instead of naming their children Brent or Melissa, some of these people gave their children very interesting names such as Moonbeam, Pure Love, Hugs, or Sunray. As the children got older, they began to go to public school, as children do. And in one neighborhood of Northern California, kindergarten teachers got used to these unusual names. And on the first day of school, the mothers would put name tags on their children and put them on the bus. And the teachers waited for the children when they got off the bus. One little boy had on a name tag which read, "Fruit Stand." The teachers thought this was a little bit different, but they rationalized that, maybe his parents had met at a fruit stand, or maybe the boy was born near a fruit stand, or whatever. So for the entire day, they asked the little boy, "Where would you like to sit, fruit stand?" Or, "Would you like some juice, fruit stand?" The little boy acted very shy, and he didn't answer the teachers out loud. At the end of the day, the teachers took the children to the bus lot, and the teacher asked, "Which bus is yours, fruit stand?" Again, the boy did not answer. But the teacher didn't worry, because the parents had been asked to write on the back of their child's name tag the name of the bus stop where they would get off the bus. So the teacher calmly reached over and turned over to the name tag, and there, written neatly on the other side, was the word Anthony. They'd been looking at the wrong side all day. So this mother was not necessarily one of them, but some mothers of this era did try to name their children based on something that had meaning to the parent as well as the child. In some cases, it turned out to have strange consequences. But this is not what was going on with the Hebrews. It wasn't that a person's name was chosen because of the meaning of the name, but instead they believed that to know a person's name meant the same as knowing the person. So if someone said they knew your name, they meant that they knew you, the very essence of you. And that's what God said about Moses. He knew his name. God knew Moses. So we can understand that Moses felt comfortable making a request of God because they had a relationship. Moses knew God, and God knew Moses intimately. So then we come to God's response. Moses had asked God to give him some guidance, to teach him how to lead the people. He was worried about leading the Israelites without God there to help him, so he asked for God's help. In response to this request, God went even a little further than what Moses had asked. God said, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." Well, hearing this, it's easy to think that God's changed his mind and agreed to go with the Israelites. But the truth is that this promise from God was only for Moses. It was a singular you. I will go with you, Moses, not the Israelites. God promised to be with Moses and offer him rest when he needed it, but he did not take back his words about not accompanying the Israelites. So we move on, and in verses 15 and 16, Moses, feeling a little bit braver, makes his next request of God. Moses says, in essence, "Okay, God, that's great. I'm glad you're going to be with me, but please don't send the people out of here without you going with us. People won't know that we're your people unless you go with us." Moses appreciated the fact that God would be with him, but he also thought it was very important for God to be with the people. Why was that? Well, what Moses realized was that the entire nation of Israel needed God to be with them because they were all in this journey together. God has created us to be in groups, families, churches, friendships. We're not meant to be alone. Moses knew that the Israelites could do far more as a nation than he could ever do alone. He also knew that all the people needed the power of God's presence. So he asked God not to send his people away unless he would go with them. So what does that mean for you and me? God has put us here for a reason. We're all part of various groups, but together we're all a part of this church. The fact is, as Moses knew, God has chosen to work in this world most powerfully, not through you or me individually, but through us. As children of God, we are the agency or the group that God has chosen to use to spread his word. We can ask for God to work through each of us individually, but if we really want to make a difference in this world, we need to be praying that God will be with our church and that he will work through our church together as a whole. That's what Moses asked for. Yes, it was good that God promised to be with Moses, but Moses realized that the real need was for God to be with all the people. So what was God's response to this? Well, again, God agrees to do what Moses asked, even though it goes against what he'd said at the beginning of the chapter. In verse 17, God actually says that he will do as Moses asks because he knows Moses and he is pleased with him. How amazing is that? God actually agreed to grant Moses' request and even changed his mind because he is pleased with Moses. Can God say that about us? Will he choose to work in and through your life because he's pleased with you? Does he know me like he knows Moses? Finally, after God agreed to Moses' second request, Moses presents his final appeal. This is where we get to the core of the passage. Let's read verse 18. Then Moses said, "Now show me your glory." Do you see that? The third request that Moses makes, this big thing that he has been leading up to, is to see the glory of God. Moses, the man who knows God and is known by God. If anyone should know the glory of God, it should be Moses. Remember, he spent time in the tent of meeting with God, speaking to him face to face. He spent time more closely with God than anyone else. So what is he really saying? Moses is really saying, I want more. The principle that's being illustrated here in Moses' life still holds true today. When we spend time with God, when we learn a little bit about Him, when we get to know Him on a more personal level, it leads us to want more. This is where we come back to Moses being desperate to know God and to be with God. He wants as much of God as he can get. He wants more. He wants to share in the glory of God. There's a song by a group called Third Day that's called Show Me Your Glory. And it expresses the intense desire that Moses felt, his yearning to know God more. The lyrics say, show me your glory. Send down your presence. I want to see your face. Majesty shines about you, and I can't go on without you, Lord. These words tell us what Moses was feeling. And we need to examine our hearts to see if we feel this same desire, the same desperation that Moses felt. His third request was to know God more, to experience His glory. Did God grant that request as well as the other two? Yes, He did, but it was a bit more difficult than the other two requests. God agreed to let His glory pass before Moses, but Moses would be hidden in the cleft of a rock while it happened. He would only be allowed to see the trail of glory left behind. No one is allowed to see God's fullness. It's too much. But Moses was allowed to see the evidence of God. He was given a portion of his request, and the reason for it was that he asked for it. Moses asked God to let him see His glory. Moses wanted to experience God's holiness. Moses, who was already closer to God than anyone else, asked for more. Moses desired to know God even better. Do you have that same desire? Moses longed to experience God in a new and more intense way. He wasn't satisfied with things the way they were. He wasn't satisfied to know God and be known by God. He wanted to know Him more. What about you? Are you satisfied with your relationship with God the way it is? You think that you know God well enough? Can you say that God speaks to you the way a person speaks to a friend? And even more importantly, do you desire to know more of God, to share in His glory? Are you satisfied with just speaking to God a minute or two each morning or each night? You think that just checking off quiet time on your list satisfies your need to know God? Or do you really, truly desire more of God? This morning you can know God more. You can experience His glory, know Him in your heart, and become closer to Him. Are you satisfied with the way things are going? If not, today's the time to change that. Even if you do already have a relationship with Christ, you might know that it can be closer. You know that you need to know Him more. Maybe you need to make a new commitment to Christ. With all of your heart, desiring to know God more each day, along with Moses, to say to Him, now show me your glory.